we already were on the move. We had lost everything. And it was so cold. Oh God, it was so cold. Because I've been uprooted so many times. Of course, I know how lucky I am. I mean, extremely lucky. Just think of it. My parents met in Halle, which is not too far from Leipzig. It is a university town, and my father was writing his doctor's thesis there. He met my mother at one of the fraternity dances.
Bitte nicht so an, du weißt es ja, ich kann dir dann nicht widerstehen. Schau mir nicht so auf den Mund, du kennst genau den Grund, so kann's nicht weitergehen.
To dance, and all his friends said no chance, and he said, I'm going to try. So he went, asked if he could have a dance, and Mutti said, yes, you'll be number 13.
Was mir dein zärtliches Lächeln verspricht, sollst du erst, wenn wir alleine sind, halten.
So when he finished and became a doctor, and then he was offered a practice, and that practice was in Australitz. We didn't suffer from any bombings, so we were okay. We kept hearing about all the bombing. My uncle in Mönchengladbach lost his house, and life actually for us went on very well, because my father was the only doctor or dentist left for the city and the surrounding towns, and from farmers from the outlying farms, they would come, and they couldn't pay him in money, but they paid him in eggs and butter and all the things we normally wouldn't be able to get, and we had. So food-wise, we were very well off. We had a huge apartment, and at the end was my father's practice. He had his examination rooms and waiting rooms, and so I got to see patients come in. Mutti had the most beautiful handcrafted furniture, bedroom furniture, Biedermeier dining room, living room, beautiful couches and window treatments and whatever. We had a nursemaid, we had a maid, housemaid, and we had a washerwoman who would come in and do the laundry. And of course, my father had at least 3 assistants. Life there was actually pretty good. And I mean, I had toys, I had everything I needed. And of course, my sister was born and she was there.
Einmal wirst du wieder bei mir sein, einmal wirst du wieder treu mir sein.
I remember distinctly she was in this beautiful bassinet with the canopy over it, and I had my bed. I mean, we shared a room after she was. I had to be a few weeks old, quite a few weeks old, and I must have still carried a grudge because I didn't want her. But anyway, I went over to that bassinet, wheeled it over to my bed, and then I pulled her up from her bassinet and dumped her in my crib. And she must have cried because the nurse came running. And went to my mother, and this is what your daughter did, you know. And so I was scolded again. They knew quite a bit of royalty, so my sister and I were invited to a birthday party of the little prince. I think the father of the birthday child was the Prince von Reuss, and they sent a coach, and they came, picked us up, and brought us home again after the party. But we went there, and I still remember, I'm sure my mother had bought the present. It was nicely wrapped. And then there were quite a few children at the castle. And so first we played games, and then we had the most beautiful birthday cake. And the other thing I remember is an orange. I don't think I had ever seen an orange. And the princess, the mother of the birthday child, she would peel the orange and make such beautiful, she made a sea rose out of it, you know. And I just thought this was divine. And then we tasted the little wedges, and it was delicious. So that was even better than the cake. I had to go to first grade. There were hardly any teachers left, but I remember we started school, then it was stopped again, then I think I had 6 weeks of first grade. That was my entire early education.
She has a passion for education, and that comes from not really having had a terrific formal education in her formative years. The schools were sporadic during the war, and after the war was over, they'd be lumping 2 or 3 grades together, and she had to get caught up. And I think that's given her a real appreciation for the impact that education can have on an individual.
And I remember once I started school, first grade, there was a boy, and that Christmas he had gotten skis. I still remember that. We both were probably just 6 years old, and he had gotten a pair of skis, and I said, I want a pair of skis. But anyway, and I think his name was Manfred. My mother told me that there were times when friends of theirs would come and visit and say, you have to do something because it's not going to last forever. You know, the Russians will be approaching. This good friend of theirs, he said, well, give me your silver, pack your silver in a suitcase, and I'll take it, and I'll hide it somewhere. I'll sink it in the river. And that's what he did. Then he also told my father he should buy a house in Bavaria or whatever. And my father, he was so busy and didn't do it. If he had done that, oh God, would have been so much better for us. I think it was January 17th when my father got drafted into the army. I mean, they said he has to help fight, but I had no idea that. I thought it was for a couple of weeks or so. He'll be back soon. And I still remember him standing in front of me. He seemed huge, this tall man in his army coat with a Red Cross band on his arm. And that was the last we saw of him. We actually hadn't been speaking when he left. I was upset that he yelled at me. And that was his biggest worry, that he could have left, with us, the two of us, in being mad at each other. Next day, we got a phone call. And my mother was out, and I was home. I mean, kids were always left alone at home. And I heard the phone, and we had one of those beautiful trunks. And I climbed up there, and I took the phone off the receiver, and I said, "Hello, here by Glück's," or whatever. And this voice said, "Where's your mother? Go get me your mother. I have to speak to your mother right away." And I said, "Well, she's not home." "Well, when she comes home, will you tell her to call me instantly?" And of course I did. And that was when this friend of theirs told my mother that we had to leave. Russian front was approaching. They were approaching and getting awfully close. And I don't think they were prepared really for that. My mother packed, and she told me I could take a couple of things, and I had just gotten for Christmas this beautiful doll. I mean, it was the most beautiful doll you can imagine. It was pretty tall, and with hair, and of course I dressed that doll ready to go with me. And then my mother said I couldn't take her, so I had to leave her. She packed a backpack for me, a little backpack, so I carried that. And then my mother just packed a suitcase for us, for the three of us. And she also had a backpack because she needed her other arm free for my sister, who was little. She was just, how old was she? 3. She had to be carried. She didn't like this and she didn't like that. I would call her a very pampered child. We left, and there were friends of theirs who were leaving at the same time, and we were going to go together, and we did. We got the train out of Großstrelitz to Breslau. At the station there, and of course we had to wait. Trains weren't running regularly, and if a train was coming, it was for the army to take people to the front. And so we waited in the station. It was a huge station. There's thousands of people in there. Then I don't know why my mother had to go. She had to go. Oh, she was trying to get a ticket or something for another train that was going to go to, I think, to Berlin, and then from Berlin we were going to go to Mönchengladbach. So she left me. She said, "Okay, you are in charge of watching the suitcase and your sister and the 2 backpacks." And then these friends of ours were there. I still remember their children were older than we were, and so she had told them to watch us. But anyway, but my mother leaves, and my sister, of course, "Mommy, I want to go with you," And she said, no, you have to stay. And then my mother goes very quickly and down the hall there, and Gigi runs after her. And I thought she had caught up with her. So I wasn't worried. I figured, okay, she got what she wanted, and my mother has to take her along. So then I was left there all by myself with the suitcases. And I mean, these people were there, but they didn't pay any attention either. But they thought Gigi was with my mother. And then my mother comes back and she says, where's your sister? I said, well, I thought she went with you. She ran right after you. Well, my mother had never, she hadn't caught up with my mother. And oh God, that was panic because I could feel it. So my mother instantly turned around and I think she tried to get to the Red Cross or somewhere to get help to find her daughter. And she was looking for help and looking for my sister. And all of a sudden, she passed another friend of theirs, and who called her and said, Marianne, come here. I have your daughter. And so my mother was relieved to see my sister. But then how did she get there? And she said, well, this woman was also waiting with her kids, and just by walks a lady who had this cute little girl on her hand. And she looks and she said, that's not her daughter, that's Gigi Glücks, or Gisela Glücks. And so she confronted the woman and said, this is not your child. I know this child. And so she released it, and she said, if you don't give her to me, I'll call the police. And so she had it, and she just waited for someone to come by. So that's how we got Gigi back. That was traumatic. And we already were on the move. I remember all these soldiers coming. It was terrible. A lot of soldiers, and they would just push away everybody, and they would walk over children, over whoever, throw them under the train, just make way for them. And we finally got on a train, and there was a Red Cross nurse, and she asked my mother if she could help her. And my mother said, oh, that would be great if she could just lift my sister and me into the train and the suitcase, which was, of course, very heavy. And she said, oh, no problem. And she takes the suitcase, and my mother has us two in the train, and turns around to take the suitcase, and the nurse and the suitcase are gone. So that was, the first disaster. And we got to Berlin, or Wilhelmshaven somehow. That's where we ended up with these friends who were sitting next to us in the Breslauer station. And it was winter, and it was cold, I remember that. Somebody had pneumonia, one of their children, I think. And I remember them carrying in snow and keeping that person cool. I guess we had a room at that house with those friends of ours. And then, so we stayed with them for a while, and then my mother found another place for us to live. And that was in one of those, those villas, and it was a retired gentleman. So, and he had all these spare rooms, so we got a couple of rooms and lived there for a while. So then the war was over, and the bombing stopped. And then the next trouble was the Russians were coming. Russians came, 2 Russian officers, and they demanded to have, rooms there, and so he had to give them living facilities. So we moved, I guess, to a little room, and but the Russian officers were actually very pleasant. I remember them. And since my sister was so cute and wouldn't eat anything, they would bring milk and they would bring bread. Yeah. So we got a little food. It was getting too dangerous. There were several deserters from the Russian army, and they would break into houses and steal. I remember somebody came in and wanted to see how much food we had and what was in that house. And he had been next door before. Those people hadn't opened the door, and he figured they were, in Germany they all have these wooden blinds, the Rolladen, that you roll down, the big wooden on rollers, and he figured they are standing behind there and looking through the slits to see if he was still there, so he blankly shot into the window, and he killed them. And the next day he came into our house, and then the owner of the house said it might be too dangerous for us to be there, so he said, "You take the children and go." And so that's when, and there was woods next to us, and we were running. The guy noticed that we were running, and that's when he shot at us, but luckily he didn't hit us. I remember hearing the shots, and I knew they came from the upstairs, from the top window there. And I can see us running, my mother, of course, carrying my sister, and me on the other hand, and we were just stumbling through the woods. So we found a little house in the woods, and we stayed there for almost a year. And this was the Russian zone. And you could not travel. The Russians wouldn't let you out. So we had to wait for some occasion that somebody could take us over the border. But, for her it was very difficult. That year we were outside in Wilhelmshaven, and for us it was, at least for me, it was nice, and in a way, that we had Mutti, and that was, somehow she created a good family life for the 3 of us. Cupboards were empty. They were empty, and one time Mutti left, and Gigi and I, we were so hungry. And so I climbed up on the counter. We searched every cabinet. All we could find were saccharin tablets. So we ate saccharin tablets. And, Gigi thought for years that she was getting cancer because we ate all these tablets. In order to keep us alive, she worked on a farm. And so we got vegetables and fruit, and or whatever fruit there was. Then one day she came back and she had stood in line for a long time and got 5 loaves of bread. 5 loaves, and on the black market. I don't know how much she had to pay for those, but she came home and she said, "How thick a slice would you like?" So we said, first said that. Oh, she said, "Come on, can be bigger." And then I said, "Okay, that big." And she cut it. And I guess we had somehow she managed to get a few books, story books for us, and she would read us a story at night and usually fall asleep, but we wouldn't let her fall asleep, you know. I mean, I hadn't been to school, you know, this whole time. I mean, my mother, was a very pampered person, you know. I mean, she grew up with wealth. She had a very privileged life. It was Papi's biggest worry that she would collapse under all this. How would my mother be able to survive? She did. And actually, I think, I'm getting emotional. That year was the best year with my mother because we had her for ourselves, Gigi and I, you know. We totally, I mean, she had to work, but we had her attention. And she would read to us at night, and I mean, she'd be the best she could be, and it was the best year for a child. Because she'd make good dolls for us, you know, out of scraps and things, and it was very simple. She'd make hamburgers out of potato skins, and coffee out of acorns, ground up acorns, and everything was so bitter. And then I don't know what we had to eat. It was just awful. And then she tried to give us something nutritious, you know, and they broke into our little house, and I think there were 2 Russians or 3 Russians, big guys, ugly guys. And I remember my mother offering them a ring or something, you know, from her finger, and just to take it and leave us alone. That was really very scary, brutal. Yeah, brutal, absolutely brutal. Yeah, I mean, the one Russian, you know, he tried to grab me, but I screamed, and you know, just to put me on his lap, and I wouldn't do that, and so I screamed, ran after my mother, and so well, she finally got rid of these guys. Gigi and I, you know, we suspected there was something, but she didn't. I don't think she said directly she was raped, but we think she was raped. So it could have been. It could have even been those Russians. And then my mother found somebody who was taking people across the border. And of course, she had to pay. And it was black market money, but I don't know how much she paid. But one night, Mutti said, we're leaving, and we have to meet somebody. And she may have told me we're leaving. That I cannot remember for sure, but all I remember is that we were leaving. And we met some people, and then we had to walk in the dark. It was night, and it was so cold. Oh, God, was it cold. And they must have put us on a car, on a truck or somewhere. We got to one of those things, you know, with the roof, the tin roofs, and it was awfully cold in there, but there were beds in there. Now that had to be at the border. I remember we were shivering like crazy, and they gave me a little sip of cognac, and I mean, I was 6, maybe by then I was 7, and it just felt so warm. I mean, I still remember that. Oh, it was wonderful. yeah, then we somehow got to the real border, and we had to go through all these examinations, and whether we had tuberculosis or lice, or we were deloused. But then I don't remember how we got from there to Mönchengladbach. That I don't remember. I must have taken a bus or a train or something, because I remember we arrived at Oma and Opa's on foot. I still remember that, Oma opening the door and seeing us bedrabbled people. For 2 years, we didn't hear a word. Till 1947. But up until then, people said, oh, they had heard from people who had seen him and he was killed, and, you know, and then my mother would cry and my grandmother would cry, and, you know, and, but then, in 47, I think we got a postcard that he was alive. I mean, after the war, he and the other doctor tried to flee. So, but they were caught by the Russians in Czechoslovakia and thrown into a prison camp. And then he was able to work as a doctor. Then he saved a Russian's life, and I think he did an appendectomy, and a poor Russian guy would have died. And so they were, of course, very grateful, and so he got mail, and he got a little extra food and things like that. From then on, he was allowed to write postcards, but because there was an artist in his camp there, and so, I mean, they had these cheap postcards, and then he had the artist draw somehow a storyline on the side, you know, like a vine going up, and he would write 25 words in the middle. But he just wanted us to remember him, you know, and that was the only way he could. They moved him to Moscow, to a prison camp or a hospital camp in Moscow. And that's where a lot of the German prisoners came through, and they were examined and before they were sent home. So my father sent everybody home, and all these people, they would always come to Gladbach first before they before they got home to their own families, and to tell my mother or grandmother that, and me, if I was around, that our father was all right. And I could always tell. We played on the Benediktinerstraße, on the street there, and when you saw a couple of bedrabbled guys, you knew they were prisoners of war just coming home. Yeah, they would go Benediktinerstraße 9. Yeah, I mean, I was used to having these soldiers come to our house, all these prisoners, and saying that Papi is all right. And then Papi came, but he looked much better. He was still thin, but he wasn't, as bedraggled as the others were. But yeah, of course, it was happiness all over, and I was happy to see my father, obviously.
In reflecting on her first 7 or 8 years and the way her family was splintered apart by the war, I think affected how she thinks about family, because she really grew up in her early years sort of, I think, as an orphan. She was determined to have children and hopefully have grandchildren, which she does, 6, and a very happy family life that was considerably different from what she grew up with. Her family life was happy, but it was a family that wasn't together in one place. And so she created that.
And and that was a lovely Christmas. Oh my gosh, I remember we went Christmas Eve, we walked through the snow. The snow was crunching, under our feet to the church. And it's a pretty church with the onion domes in Oberammergau. And that was very meaningful. And we were all so happy. And, I guess my mother got over the shock that my father is finally back. Puppy had to start from zero, start a new life, actually, a new existence, to make money and whatever. We had lost everything, except for the silver. That was when we were back. Then after a while, the person who had hidden it or sunk it in the river got it out of the river.
Irmy's early childhood gave her traits that I think a normal woman would not have had because of the experiences she went through. She has a great strength of character, much more so than most women I know. She developed a streak of independence because she had to be independent and on her own so often.
Like I always said to myself, I can take care of myself. I will make it no matter what.
She developed a real empathy for other people, I think given the circumstances that she happened to see in Germany during the war.
I hope I taught the kids that you can always, if you learn and if you earn money and you just make sure you can take care of yourself. Of course, I know how lucky I am. I mean, extremely lucky. Just think of it. Have a wonderful husband, have 3 terrific children, really, and 6 grandchildren, 3 in-laws. So I know how lucky we are, or I am.
Hold on to me as we go, as we roll down this unfamiliar road. And although this wave is stringing us along, just know you're not alone. 'Cause I'm gonna make this place your home. Settle down, it'll all be clear. Don't pay no mind to the demons, they fill you with fear. The trouble, it might drag you down. If you get lost, you can always be found. No, you're not alone. 'Cause I'm gonna make this place your home. Yeah, I had no intention I would get locked up tonight, but I looked in your eyes and they went through me. me like a knife. I came here with my crew, I lost him. Came with my cool, I dropped it. And if I'm being honest, I'm being honest. I can't think when you're looking like that. Can't breathe when you're moving like that. Tell me when you're gonna do me like that. Yeah, I'm so weak and I'm never like that. Like speed and I think I might crash. One trip down, I might never go back. But everything's gonna be alright. I think I just met my wife. Yeah, I said it. I know it's gonna be a good night. I think I just met my wife.
We met, as everybody seeing this video knows, I think, at a student pub in Heidelberg.
I met some friends at Zeppel, and we were sitting at a round table and talking. Then to the right of us was the piano and the piano player, and in front of him was a long table with a lot of young men.
And I was at one table with a group of my buddies. One of them was leaving to come back to the United States, and we were having a nice all-male farewell party.
And found out that they were having a goodbye party for one of their fellow soldiers. He was going back to the States.
And she was at a mixed table of boys and girls at another adjacent table.
And they were having a very good time, but after a while we figured out they were Americans. But they were all in civilian clothes.
And I was in the middle of a conversation, and suddenly I felt a wet spitball hit my cheek. And I recognized it came from the little cardboard that you put under a beer stein to catch the suds.
I'm pretty sure that table, the American table, started it. They rolled up these little spitballs on the beer deckles and flicked them over to us.
And I looked over, and here was this German Fräulein, and her arm was extended like that.
Well, that was an invitation to retaliate. So we did, and then that went back and forth.
In the spirit of good fun, I made a spitball from under my beer stein and threw it and hit her right on the cheek.
Then the piano player said, "Children, children, stop it. The war has been over for many years. Why don't you make friends and sit together?"
And then Otto, who played the piano in the pub, said, "Children, children, the war's been over for 15 years or 20 years, whatever it was, and you ought to get together at the same table and sit down and talk. Let's make peace."
So we moved over to them and started talking.
So we sat down, and she sat down next to me.
We sat, I think, across from each other.
I was pretty instantly smitten. I don't know why, but I just was.
So somehow Dad and I connected.
I invited her out to a drink the next night, a beer. We didn't drink anything more than beer.
We had a lively conversation, and then he asked me if he could see me the next day.
And I didn't think she'd accept, because she knew I was an American soldier, though I wasn't in uniform.
And I said, sure. And he asked me what my name was, and I told him Dorothy. I don't know why I gave the name Dorothy, but that must have been a name that came into my head at that time. And then the next day, I was supposed to meet him in Heidelberg, somewhere at a place across the street from Zeppel. And my friend Sigrid and I guess somebody had asked her to go out with her too. So we double dated. We went to this restaurant, and that's when he told me he's going to take me to Paris and he's going to marry me.
On the first date?
On the first date. Plus, he kissed me on the first date.
What?
Yes. Ooh, yes. And so I said, these Americans, I have to be careful.
It's gonna be a good night. I think I just met my wife. Hey,
after a while, I guess I had to tell him that my real name actually was Irmy. And I told more the truth about me.
We complement each other beautifully. Her strengths mirror or compensate for my weaknesses and vice versa.
And everything's gonna be alright. I think I just met my wife. Yeah. I know
In
it's gonna
Christmas 1960, we got engaged.
I had a mission, and that was that I was going to ask her father in the traditional way for her hand in marriage. We spoke only German. My German wasn't as terrific as I would like it to be, and I knew the deck was stacked against me for a lot of reasons. I knew it was going to be really an uphill fight, but we, at the appropriate time, sat down around a round table, and I think he knew what was coming.
Because I wasn't going to get married yet.
You weren't?
Oh boy, eventually, yeah, but not yet. I was 21. Marriage was the furthest thing from my mind. But he was different. But we could talk. We would talk for hours. It was just always very interesting. We always had something to talk about.
And the ladies of the house kept bringing us schnapps in little glasses, and I would be knocking them down at a pretty brisk pace because I found that my German improved glass by glass. I really got quite fluent by the 4th or 5th class.
Can't think when you're looking like that. Can't breathe when you're moving like that. Tell me when you're gonna do me like that. Yeah.
And I think all of that together convinced him that a soldier American, a non-student, a poor person of a different religious faith might work out. And so he eventually said yes, and life went on from there.
I think I just met my wife. Alright. Maybe it's the music or the red stain on your lips.
Well, she totally transformed my life. She's the best thing that ever happened to me.
This instant, it was just there. It was something that drew us together.
But it's just her warmth and love and caring that make life very special.
I know it's gonna be a good night. I think I just met my wife. Come on, everything's gonna be alright.